One more time.
Okay.
Okay. I'm Liam Kelly from the Institute of Asian Studies at University Brunei Darussalam, and I'm talking today to Dr. Johannes Kurz from the program in History and International Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at University Brunei Darussalam, and we're going to talk about Brunei in Chinese historical sources, the Southern Tang Dynasty, and probably many other things. Welcome, Johannes.
Thank you.
So you are a regular speaker at the Institute of Asian Studies Wednesday seminar series, and you've given a talk recently on relatively recent writings from Chinese scholars in the past few decades that deal with the history of the relations between China and Brunei. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about what that research is and what you found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So my research in that regard started with a statement by Chinese President Xi Jinping, which he made in November 2018, talking about 2,000 years of friendly relations between Brunei and China. And of course, I was interested to know where these 2,000 years came from. And then prior to that speech by the president, I had read an article published 5 or 6 years ago that claimed that ever since the Chinese conquered the South China Sea 2,000 years ago, the South China Sea was basically Chinese territory. So that interested me as a historian and as
Sorry, that paper you wrote was in response to a claim by a Chinese scholar who had made that.
I thought it was appropriate to have a look at this more specifically once it basically became Chinese official policy. Anything the president says is, of course, official. So I looked at where these where this talk of 2,000 years of history came from. As a trained Chinese studies person, of course, I look at texts. As a classically trained Chinese studies person. So what I did was I checked a database with relevant academic journals. And I found that one of the first mentions of Brunei in a Chinese journal was in 1958, and that was mostly concerned with the discovery of a tomb in Nanjing that is allegedly the tomb of one of the early sultans of Brunei. And then I followed the journals through the 60s to the 70s, and I found that the talk of 2,000 years of these relations is relatively recent, maybe not going further back than the late 1980s after Brunei had gained independence. But even then, President Jiang Zemin in 2000 said that Brunei and China enjoyed 1,000 years of friendly relations. So in the meantime, another 1,000 years were added. So once I finished the survey of the journal articles, I looked at the actual evidence, and there was not much. And the evidence that you find is highly controversial. One scholar who claimed that ceramics were found in Borneo dating back 2,000 years in a paper that he wrote 3 years after that paper. He just ignored what he had said and said that all these ceramics had only been found in Java. So basically there was no archaeological evidence for any of these alleged relations at that early time. And that, of course, that interested me because that linked my interest in classical Chinese historiography with modern Chinese politics. And that was also a way, I thought, for me to stay relevant as a classically trained scholar in a world that's focusing more now on contemporary history and history writing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a few of your talks by now, and it seems that one very prominent issue is that there is not a lot of information in Chinese historical sources about Brunei, and I mean, the further, yes, and the information that does exist tends to be vague or, like you said, controversial. But then, if one person writes something and makes a claim, then later other people will quote what that person wrote without checking back to the original sources. And so beyond this talk that you just gave, over the past few years, you've actually done a lot of research on what is exactly written in Chinese sources and what we can do with that and what we can, base our ideas on, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Once I arrived here, one of my colleagues who has retired since told me, "Oh, why don't you write something new? Because Walters seems a little bit old and no, you should be doing more research on this stuff because you can read Chinese." And first of all, I was reluctant, but then over the years I became more interested in the stuff. And when I started, it was the early 2000s. There was not much material in terms of online sources. So what I did every time I went back to Germany, go to my old university in Heidelberg and basically copy through the library there. Nowadays it's much easier.
Online, probably, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, and in between I had a research assistant and he copied like 6,000 or 7,000 pages.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Half of which is still staying in Germany because it's too heavy to carry.
Right.
Yeah, but as I said, nowadays it's easier to access this material. So I think I've spent the first 5 or 6 years just figuring out how people were creating a history of Brunei from Chinese sources that went back, I think in one case to the 6th century and in another case to the 9th century. It took a long time for me to get through that until I was finally able to come up with explanations that I found myself more convincing, of course.
Right.
And I think I also convinced at least some editors of some journals because they accepted what I wrote for publication.
Yeah, no, that sounds very familiar to me because I've done similar things with Vietnam, where you're you find the original scholarship that was created was maybe by people who didn't know the Chinese sources, and then you have to go through that first. Then you have to make sense of the Chinese sources, and but it's a valuable contribution.
Yeah, and because I think one of our colleagues asked me why I was wasting my time basically with the study of Borneo, and I don't think I wasted my time because I learned how to work with the sources. Right, I collected the sources over 10 or 12 years. And I think that also makes it now much more easy for me to go into other aspects of
which is exactly what you did with the South China Sea. Last spring I went to a very well-attended talk that you gave here on Chinese scholarship on the South China Sea. And I think a lot of people went to that talk expecting that you as an historian was going to make a stand and say, this is who has the greatest claim to the South China Sea, but that's not what the purpose of what you did there at all. Yeah.
No. In order to do that, I think I would have had to do policy studies or whatsoever, but I'm a historian and I'm working with the Chinese texts. And again, my interest there was that an article appeared in 1975 that basically became the roadmap for all further official Chinese proclamations concerning the South China Sea. And I looked at the sources that this article was using. what these sources said and how they were interpreted.
Right.
So it's not so much what the source is saying. In all these cases, it has all to do with interpretation. And of course, interpretations can be biased.
Right.
But the Chinese are no exception. The thing for me is that I know the Chinese stuff, so I can say something about this. I cannot say much about the Vietnamese case,
Right.
who probably also claim that they have owned a number of islands for a long time. So my interest there was to see how modern historians, working of course for the state, were doing their best to support the policies as they were expressed by a number of government figures in the government of the People's Republic of China, and what impact this had.
Right. But then with your background from having spent years examining the Chinese materials on Brunei, you're able to, I mean, essentially realize that a lot of the materials that they're using to make claims are very difficult to use for doing that, right? Because they're can be interpreted in different ways or aren't clear. Or
yeah, I think it depends. There are some that are difficult to interpret. But then others, it's quite obvious that the interpretations are biased.
I see.
So whenever, for instance, in the case of a term called Zhanghai, which is the wild ocean, the Chinese claim that was a term that covered the whole of the South China Sea since 2,000 years or so.
Okay,
So and I don't see that really.
I see, right. Yeah, okay.
Because they didn't know the boundaries.
Right,
But then the Chinese say, no, this is what we say, this is what we have, and therefore this is the whole of the South China Sea.
Right.
But,
So these are all issues that you've engaged in recent years, but starting before that, and I think continuing on to now, you have other interests. And at least, one of your starting points was focusing on the Southern Tang Dynasty.
Yes. Yeah.
So what is exciting about the Southern Tang Dynasty?
Oh, nothing at all.
Oh, okay.
Except for me.
I see.
But I would, when I did my MA dissertation, I had, which was basically also a translation from the official history of the Song. There was one sentence that I did not understand at all. And my supervisor told me that...
I'm just making sure we're still recording here. Okay. Anyway, because the phone went off, it was a good place to break. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So you can keep going. So your MA...
Shall I turn this off?
Are they going to keep calling, or...?
Probably.
Okay. Okay, so back from our phone call. You were talking about your MA on the Southern Tang.
So basically I was totally ignorant of the Southern Tang. And I didn't know that in the 10th century there was no Chinese empire, but there were a few Chinese states.
Okay.
And I chose the Southern Tang. I don't really know why. But no, I know why. It had the most material. There's about, how many? 10 to 20 texts from the middle of the 10th century until the end of the 13th century that tell us something about the Southern Tang. And what specifically interested me there was how the decline of the state was linked to the influence of an evil faction. And then I was looking at contemporary politics in the late 11th century, and I found that most of the works that had been written on the Southern Tang were written at that time. So what they basically did was fight the factional struggle of their time in the history of this dynasty.
I see, okay.
In the course of time, I have written more about the Southern Tang. And what I really would like to do is put them on a level with the 5 dynasties in the north, which are considered the legitimate successors to the real Tang dynasty. by someone who wrote in the middle of the 11th century. And I think, again, here the interpretation of what that person called Ouyang wrote has clouded our understanding of that little dynasty. Therefore, many people still call it today a kingdom when it was not a kingdom but an empire. It had everything.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it had official examinations. It had reign titles. That was one of only two of these states in the middle of the 10th century that actually actively collected books from the Tang Dynasty, and it's mostly due to them that the Sung Dynasty then inherited Tang Dynasty works, and books written in the Tang Dynasty. Okay. And then that led to my interest in the encyclopedias that were written at the end of the 10th century, about which I've also published 1 or 2 articles.
Okay, and that's a lot, from the Southern Tang Dynasty to the South China Sea to Brunei in Chinese historical sources. What's next?
What's next is, presently I started reading up on Srivijaya because our colleague in APB told me, why don't you do something on Srivijaya? And then my former supervisor, a professor in Munich, told me, it would be nice if someone would be doing something on Srivijaya, and he wrote that to me, so that I took that as a sign that I had to do something. So since the summer break, I'm working now on this stuff. And
well, here again, you're going to have to look at a lot of things that have been written by French and other scholars, and then the Chinese stuff as well, right?
Yeah, the Chinese stuff is not that bad. It's just you have to go through all these layers that have accumulated over the last 100 years, where you go from something that has 7 inscriptions in Old Malay and Sanskrit, and all of a sudden you have an empire that is dominating the seas, and I don't understand how that works. So I'm looking at it from the Chinese side, how that Srivijaya, for which we have a Shirley Forscher in the Tang, becomes a Sanfochi, and because the Chinese sources don't say that Sanfochi is a successor to Shirley Forscher. And that is where I'm at now, and as you mentioned already, I look at all this French writing, which is highly interesting, but they wrote long articles. They would no longer be accepted nowadays. They go 200-300 pages.
And in very dense language that goes, okay. So, I guess we'll have to stop here, but it looks like we're going to have a Wednesday seminar next year on Srivijaya.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
sure.
well, I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you for having a talk with us, Johannes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.